Welcome to the November 23rd SLVEN General Meeting. And this evening, we're going to talk about our neighborhoods, your neighborhood, and what has been happening in our neighborhoods that supports preparedness and supports resilience and supports community. It's a great time of year to be thinking about what we're grateful for, and also a good time of year to think about what we'd like to envision moving on into the future and enhancing our lives and starting from where we live. So welcome everyone to the call. We have a couple of interesting projects to hear from this evening. One in Bonny Doon. I think it was told to me as called MURS in the neighborhood, and Lisa will tell us a bit more about that. Sounds very exciting. And also, we're going to talk about a neighborhood that is starting on the path to try to kick off an initiative for FireWise, and we want to hear what's been happening with that initiative. And then we also want to open up discussion for anyone who's joined us, talk about issues or concerns in the neighborhoods and see what kind of brainstorming we can do to put together ideas or just take some inspiration from each other. So, I happened to stumble on a technical article just today that was talking about resilience from a technology standpoint, and I thought it was kind of interesting. So resilience is a word that means how do you cope with a situation, maybe an unexpected situation, and how do you, there's a sense of springing back. How do you spring back to a sense of normalcy afterwards? So I thought it was an interesting word to think about what does that mean in terms of our communities. So if something unexpected happens, how do you react? So there's a preparation side that we talk about of having go bags and caring for your property and having gas in your car and those kinds of things, which allows you to respond to emergencies or disasters. But there's more than that, right? So how do you use your relationships with your neighbors? Who's good at what? What can you put into play? There's a sense of dynamism as like in the moment, what can be done, what resources can be put to use, which I think is implied also in the word resilience. So I think it's a really interesting thing to think about in terms of if you just look at what you might think are issues or problems in the neighborhood, to try to put it in a slightly different frame of reference of what are all the resources that could come to bear, or just clever ways of collaborating. I think has an opportunity to unlock solutions. So I think it's a very exciting concept, and so I just invite us to think about that as we have this conversation this evening. What I'd like to do is take a moment and show you all the SLVEN website. We've done a little bit of a reorganization, so I wanted to show it off a little bit. So I'm going to try to share my screen, see if I'm successful here. And I've got to minimize some of the Zoom controls, which I'm not quite sure how to minimize, but I think you don't see it. So what you should see on my screen is a web page open on SLVEN.org. This is our SLVEN website. And what we've got here on our main page, if I scroll down, is we've got these very eye-catching images that are of different subject areas: wildfire, earthquake, debris flow, power shutoff, evacuation, traffic and weather. And these are meant to be directional what would you call these, links, I guess, for anyone who wants to come to our website and look for information. And if you click on the link, then it'll open up another page, a topic page. This one's wildfire and property. And what we've basically got here is we have a combination of web links and meeting videos. With our general meetings, we have done a lot of meeting by Zoom this year, 2021. And so when we have subjects on these, in the meetings on these topics, like prepping for fire season, and even last year we had a nice meeting, we talked about home hardening with Liz Ann Jensen from Santa Cruz Fire Safe Council. And also we've got a lot of web links for, documents and websites and so forth that are on the same subject area. So hopefully this will be easier for people who are looking for certain subject areas to find that here. These are also found here under topic pages, so I can navigate to another one easily from here. So debris flows and floods. We did talk about debris flow in October 2020, so we've got that meeting link. So we invite you to take a look at those. If you want, we also have just all the meeting recordings that we have done in reverse chronological, most recent order first. So these are all the recordings in one place. And additional links that we have that didn't fit under those categories, we've got also a links page. So some COVID-19 links, local groups, some trainings and stuff. So that's what I wanted to show you. And also I should note that so all of 2021, we toyed with the idea of having meetings in person, but we played it rather conservatively and wanted to be cautious with the mask mandates and so forth, social distancing. So what we ended up doing was meeting basically for the whole year on Zoom. But in 2022, we are cautiously optimistic that we can begin to meet in person and have hybrid meetings. We are hoping to meet at the Felton Library, Felton branch of the library, in their community room. And they have some meeting technology that we hope will help facilitate having hybrid. And I'm sure we'll start out with indoor masking coming off of the holidays, as we're now all asked to be masking indoors as we come into this holiday season. So anyway, we are optimistic that we will be able to see some of you in person and enjoy that. And then those who still would prefer to meet on Zoom, we certainly hope that we'll be able to have you join us that way as well. So we're looking forward to that in January. So our next general meeting will be in January. We will not have a meeting in December. And so it's the fourth Tuesday of the month in January, 7 to 9 p.m. Okay. Let's go back to our topic at hand for the evening. So maybe Liz, I could ask you to speak for a few minutes on a program that's called Map Your Neighborhood.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. Map Your Neighborhood is a program that I think has been in existence now for probably about 15 years, if not longer. It was developed in Washington State. I believe it was developed by a professor at one of the universities. And what's interesting is it very much parallels a program that we had in the Valley called the Mountain Neighbor Network. And this was back from the mid 80s. But this one kind of has blossomed and become a universal example of how to organize your neighborhood, because many people would like to have something put together, know their neighbors more than just a wave in the driveway. Thank you, Dan, for putting that website up. It's a really excellent little plan. It's actually a program that has been sponsored by CERT for as long as I've been associated with the CERT Auxiliary. So that's been about 6 or 7 years. There have been various attempts to start the program up to provide access to neighborhoods. And when neighbors hoods have come together and decided they want to do Map Your Neighborhood, we have folks that are trained, including myself, if a little rusty, on how to help folks develop Map Your Neighborhood. The idea basically is that neighbors come together, and the initial meeting may start out as something almost like a Tupperware party, only we're not selling anything. We can come in with a program that's about an hour and a half long, and present that idea to the neighbors that are interested in putting this together. It includes a lot of pointers on how to do it, how to organize, the kinds of things, information you need to share amongst yourselves. That includes the kinds of things you mentioned, Tammy, about people with specialized skills. It's kind of a record of who lives there, how many people live there, you know, do you have children, do you have elderly, do you have somebody who's has a special needs living with you, so that your neighbors also know that what that family might need in an emergency, be that an earthquake or a flood or whatever. And so that it's an organized way for neighbors to help each other and have pertinent information. The organizing of it, usually after the initial presentation by somebody like me or somebody in their neighborhood, is for the neighbors to become the group that keeps this going. So it's built from the inside. It's not something that's imposed. And I believe the FireWise program is similarly organized, only it's organized primarily around fire, whereas Map Your Neighborhood can be a neighborhood response to any emergency or disaster of any sort. I know that in some neighborhoods, this can also be, it can also be the founding and the work laying for a community that is in the neighborhood. Neighborhoods can just be neighborhoods with people that don't know each other and whatever, or they can be communities. And this can be a way to create community in your neighborhood as well. Like I said, the program lasts about an hour and a half. You use a video, a disc, to kind of lead you through the process, to explain what the process is. There is paperwork that is available to those of us who are trainers. I'll use that term very loosely here. And we kind of go in and help give people the some inspiration and some ideas and some how-tos, and then they take it from there. And if you have people that are really dedicated to putting this together, it can be quite exciting for the neighborhood. And it depends also on how open the neighborhood is. Do you mind if somebody in your neighborhood knows that, you know, you have lots of tools, or, you know, some neighborhoods are very closed and some are very open. And for a neighborhood that's open, this would probably work more efficiently. But it really, again, depends on the will of the neighborhood, whether they really want to have this develop. But it can start with just a handful of people. I personally haven't done Map Your Neighborhood in my neighborhood, because our neighborhood already has some of the basics built in from back 25 years ago when we formed a road association. And that's what brought our neighbors all together and to knowing each other at that time. Some of that has fallen away over 25 years, but there's still those of us who we just have that neighborhood sense of things. So I think it's a great program. It's full of great ideas, and it's really then up to the individual neighborhood to grab that resource and make it work. And it doesn't have to be complex or invasive. It really depends on what the neighborhood is comfortable with. But I can speak from personal experience that when our neighborhood was hit by the flood of '98, the fact that we had a neighborhood organization, it did many of the things that a Map Your Neighborhood would have done for each other. So I think just having people know each other, have a sense of who's in the neighborhood and who's not, and what resources are available, that is invaluable no matter what you're responding to. And it really is part of that resilience that you were talking about, Tammy. It creates that ability to respond more quickly. It allows the neighborhood to know what to do and who's got what, who should be here and who shouldn't. Where does somebody need extra help? So it lays all that foundation and helps the neighborhood develop that. Anyway, this is a program that is available at no cost. If somebody contacts me as a CERT leader, I'll either go do a Map Your Neighborhood with their neighborhood, or I will arrange for somebody that I know that does that to go do that for them. Like I said, it's a lot like a house party with a goal. And so we need somebody to host that and bring their neighbors together. And but once we've got that core group, then we can start to work with them. Anyway.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Anyone on the call ever try the Map Your Neighborhood in your neighborhood, that particular program?
I looked at the materials, but where I live, there isn't very conducive to it. It's too spread out. And so never really followed through with it.
So you spread out, meaning like in your neighborhood, the spaces in your neighborhood are larger.
Yeah, well, it's miles and miles and miles of country road. So
right. Yeah, Dinah Sue.
When I first met Caroline, she was a big proponent for this, and she brought me a lot of information, and I didn't have a meeting with her, which would have been really helpful, especially from what I just heard from Liz. But I live in a neighborhood where people are door to door to door to door to door, and I misunderstood. I collected a whole bunch of information and then didn't know what to do with it, but made notes of all the addresses and the people that I noticed that were in wheelchairs or that seemed to need additional assistance if some emergency could have happened, which was, just a handful of people. But then Caroline mentioned to me at some point that basically what it was, I didn't need to go and get 125 addresses in my group. It was a line of sight. Anybody that you can see from your front door is the people that you would particularly have in your group.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, some neighborhoods are too, they need to be chunked up so that they're manageable.
Yeah, it was a little overwhelming, and I backed out of it. I didn't proceed beyond that point.
Interesting. Yeah, Bill.
Hey, I wanted to acknowledge the biggest point that I'm taking away from Liz's presentation is it doesn't have to be just a Map Your Neighborhood. It can be a road association. It can be, a regular Tupperware party. I mean, the idea of finding ways to get the neighbors to know each other. And yeah, there's some nice things about knowing, where the most vulnerable people are, where the tools are, things like that. And both FireWise and Map Your Neighborhood try to focus on that. But I live in a closed neighborhood, and I'm a new person in a closed neighborhood. And so it's been very difficult to get much information about my neighbors without appearing to be this nosy, guy that's prying into trying to get too much information. And I really like the idea of alternative ways to organize that may lead into something like FireWise or Map Your Neighborhood. So Liz, Road Association, that was a valuable observation. Thank you.
Well, 2 years after we formed the Road Association, we had the flood of '98, and it had been quite an event for the formation of the Road Association. It was driven by the fact that our roads were so bad that the post office was threatening to stop delivering mail door to door. And they were in really pitiful shape. And so people came together out of threat of the whip and said, okay, I guess we have to do something about this if we want to keep the luxury of door-to-door mail, and we did. And there was sometimes there's just this critical mass of people that need to come together to make that happen. And it can be driven by a number of factors, and that may drive what the spur is for getting things done. I know in Bonny Doon, the very real threat of the fires has been a galvanizing issue. I know that in Felton Grove right now, probably don't have too many galvanizing issues right now. So the organization of the neighbors has kind of sloughed off. And, I feel like it's time for somebody else to pick that up and take it. But, I still know what I know, and some of us still know what we know. And so even though it's not a perfect situation, there's still a lot of work, a lot of knowledge there that kind of is laying and waiting for it to be called forth. So even if you do a small effort, I don't feel like it's a lost effort, because any effort you put into this kind of organizing is going to be more than you had before.
Well, Liz, I want to point out a couple things. First of all, having a road association oftentimes leads to regular meetings. So I know we had a water association at a former neighborhood. So finding a reason to continue to meet with people, I think is important for, ramping up community resiliency and building community. The other thing that I think would be interesting to talk about in this group is the effect that COVID had on keeping neighborhoods apart. And, I think that that's been a significant challenge to be able to overcome. Like, we can't have a meeting at my house now, except maybe an open yard is what I was calling it, to be able to have people come and visit the yard. But the open house is not currently feasible in the time of COVID. So that I put on the table as another challenge to organizing and building resiliency in your neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well,
and also look how we've all mastered, these meeting platforms like Zoom. And, think back a year ago, and we were all still trying to struggle, like, how do I get on? And what do I, do you hear me? And, and now we're all pros. So it is,
Yes.
which is great.
Yes, there are a lot of unspoken barriers. I just want to remind everybody, though, that where there's a will, there's a way, and we have found ways to mitigate those barriers to a certain extent. So whether it's Zoom or having a meeting in a really open place and practicing and masking and having distancing, what we have today that we didn't have a year ago even were vaccines, so that people could congregate more safely in ways that we couldn't have done a year ago, because nobody had a vaccine then. So looks like we lost somebody. Too bad. So anyway, so I think that, there's also been some positive changes that have occurred with COVID that allow us to stretch a little more widely, a little more Anyway,
Well, let's turn and, yeah, Lisa, hi.
I was just going to say, radios are inherently socially distanced.
yeah,
Right.
Yes.
So what a great segue, Lisa. Let's have you tell us what's been going on in Bonny Doon. Little birdie told me
Okay.
that something special has been happening there, and I'm very excited to hear about it.
It is very exciting. I'm going to share my screen and show you a few things. Okay, let's see if I can get this right. So hopefully, and it's all related to FireWise and to map your neighborhood. The first thing I just wanted to show you, and I can put this link in the chat, but it doesn't look like I can do it while I'm sharing. But this is a FireWise meeting that was for the Rodeo Gulch neighborhood. And Don Mackey, who is our radio community organizer, about 32 minutes into this, gives a short talk about radios. So I listened to it and I took some notes, but then I look at this group and I think you guys might already know a lot of this stuff that she said. So I'm just going to try to summarize it. And if you want, you can take this link and go back, and about 32 minutes in, you can see Dawn's talks. There's a lot of other good talks in there too. But basically, the short version, what Dawn was saying was that we have this situation where we have no power, we have no internet, we have no phones. So what are we going to do? You know, how are we going to solve that problem? And it seemed like radio was the obvious answer, but there's a lot of different radios. There's FRS radios, which is family service radios. There's MURS radios, multi-use radio service. There's GMRS radios, general multi-use. There's CB radios, there's ham radios. So it's actually CERT, which you guys are, you know, the core of. About 5 years ago, got together and put together this committee to do a study and figure out what the best radio was to use in these kind of situations. And it had to be readily available. It had to be fairly inexpensive. It had to have a 2 to 3 mile range. It had to be easy to use and no license required. So they got together with the ARES, the Amateur Radio Emergency Services, who I know half you guys are in that too. And they came up with this standard of the MURS radio, the BTEC V1 MURS radio, and along with a standard configuration. So if any CERT person went to a different neighborhood, they could pick up somebody else's radio and use it. It was, you know, meant to be simple, easy to use, and transferable, and easy to support for a large number of people. So after the fire, I guess kept thinking when you were talking before, we always said, don't let any good crisis go to waste. So after the fire, people were motivated to figure out some solutions to these problems, and radio was one of them. So Dawn Mackey, who's the community organizer for Bonny Doon, she talked to the CERT people and got permission to use the same radios. You know, based on the technology, there shouldn't be interference if they're a certain distance away. And if they are, maybe the CERT people could even talk to the neighborhood and get useful information. So when Dawn started looking to push this out or talk to people in Bonny Doon, the first people she went to were the people who had already done Map My Neighborhood and had already done FireWise, because they were already 75% of the way there to being organized. We have one great example of Map My Neighborhood in Bonny Doon. It's called Country Estates, and they have zones and they have special houses for the kids to go to if their parents aren't home. And I mean, they just learned about each other and learned what people needed and put it into place, what was appropriate for their neighborhood. I mean, the same thing with FireWise. The FireWise neighborhood had some extra money and they went out and bought MURS radios to help ramp up the communication stuff in their neighborhood. So it's definitely a good place to start. But once the neighborhoods are talking, they wanted to take it one step further, and that's where the ham radio operators came in. So the ARIES, they already have protocols for talking to the Emergency Operations Center. And so what they did was, what Dawn organized was a ham radio operator in each neighborhood to collect all the neighborhood information on MURS and then feed that up through the ham radio network to someone who could call 911 or who could be out of the area where the disaster was. So that's the short version, hopefully, of Dawn's talk. And then what I just wanted to tell you a little bit about was how we started doing it in Bonny Doon. So they started talking about it, I guess, in April, and then they had the first radio exercise in June. And that was 7 neighborhoods with 51 people. And they played a little game. They told each neighborhood coordinator to put some kind of sign or something in the neighborhood and have everyone go find it and report in what they found. So a cute one was one neighborhood put Donald Duck, a big little poster of Donald Duck. And everyone had to call in, I found Donald Duck on the corner of A Street and B Street. So they practiced talking on the radio, they practiced finding things in the neighborhood, and they practiced describing a location, which is an important thing that you need to do on radios. So that was the first exercise. Then in July, we had an exercise where they decided that people should know who they could talk to from their homes. So everyone started in their homes and started to see who they could talk to in their neighborhood. And I had a really good example in my neighborhood. You know, sometimes you can't hear people, you tell them, okay, go outside, you'll be able to hear better outside on the radio. And one of my neighbors said, well, I'm sitting in my bedroom because this is where I'm going to be in an emergency when I grab the radio, and I wanted to know if it would work from my bedroom. That's great. That's just the kind of things you want people to know, to figure out. And you learn things about people in the neighborhood too. Like one of my neighbors wouldn't stop talking. Another neighbor wouldn't talk unless you specifically asked her to talk. But that's good to know. That's all the kind of things you want to know and practice. So by August, we realized we were up to 16 neighborhoods and 95 people with these MURS radios. And we also had a ham radio operator in each neighborhood talking up to a central net control ham radio operator amongst all of Bonny Doon. But that's when we kind of realized that every neighborhood was different and they were at different places, and maybe like a general exercise wasn't going to be right for everyone. So we left the exercises to the neighborhood coordinators. If you're just beginning, just do a simple roll call. If you have a bunch of kids and you want to teach them, you know, send them out in the neighborhood to find something. My neighbors, they don't want to go around the neighborhood looking for things. They just want to push the button and know they can talk. So that's what we do in our neighborhood. So we continue to meet more people. And one of the really interesting things that came out of these, the people that we met was a guy who's actually got like a PhD in radio science. He designed radio tracking tags for whales. He worked at Waze, the mapping company. And he started, well, first of all, I made this website for us. And it's really simple. It's bonnydoonradio.info. And it has a lot of just the basic stuff on it. And anyone can use it and anyone can go look at it and leverage it. But, you know, we made a simple mission. We made a disclaimer because we didn't want people to think like we were the sheriff's department giving evacuation notices, or we were code red providing any of that. We're only as good as the people who are in the neighborhoods and participating. But we, you know, like your website, Tammy, we put a lot of quick links like what radio should I buy? How does it work? You know, answered a lot of the basic questions about radios. But one of the really cool things that came out of it that that Bill came up with was we made these maps for each neighborhood that wanted to do the testing. He made a plan and someone would stay home and he would drive in this big spiral and test how far the radios would go. So these maps, like this is the neighborhood that I'm in down here, Brissa Del Mar. I was sitting at my house and he went around and literally mapped which areas he could communicate with. He even took it one step further, and I won't play it for you now, but he did through Google Earth this 4-minute video flyover that has the mapped areas shown in the video. This guy is really talented and he really did a lot of great things, but you can get to that link from this Bonny Doon radio. It's in one of the links, that the simulated flyover of Bonny Doon. There's the 2D maps. There's just a current list of what neighborhoods are on what channel. But as we started doing this, we decided it was important to try to talk between neighborhoods. So we started putting that into our groups because there was, there's overlap, and some people in some neighborhoods could talk to other neighborhoods. So we had other exercises where we're talking around the neighborhoods on the MURS. We experimented with different antennas. For the most part, we didn't need any bigger antennas. The radios that came with antennas were just fine. But in some cases, the community organizers did opt for the stronger antennas. We continue to have monthly meetings. We now have over 20 neighborhoods and over 100 people with these MURS radios. We have one more exercise in December where we're going to simulate like a message coming down from the top. So if there was an evacuation warning and people couldn't get it on their phones, this would be an alternate way to push that message down through the ham radio operators to the MURS radio operators through the neighborhood. Again, it's not a substitute for any of those other services, but it's just in addition or to augment in the case that some of those services aren't available. So that's really it. Does anybody have any questions?
Oh, so many. How did you guys decide what constituted a neighborhood? How big, how many houses, or proximity? What kind of decisions went into that?
It really varied. It really varied. Like my neighborhood is small. There's only 10 houses and only 6 people that are here full time that were interested in the radios. So we have a really small neighborhood. Bigger neighborhoods like Pine Ridge, they have 90 potential houses and 30 of them burned down in the fire. So they're different, right? And they have different community organizers, but they are all they have one road in and out. So that was the definition for them. The same with Country Estates. They have, more than us, but less than Pine Ridge. But they basically have 2 roads in and out. So they had done Map My Neighborhood. They already had their zones. They started with their zones, but then they determined who could go farther. I like the person who said earlier, maybe the answer in your neighbor, in a more tightly packed neighborhood, is the people you can see from your front doorstep. It really just varied a lot, and it depended on the neighborhood. It depended in some cases on where there was a ham radio operator available or someone who was willing to organize. Like up further on Empire Grade, they were much more spread out. And they basically just started taking in single people until they got enough to split them into 2 groups, and then they divided them. So I think there's no one size fits all answer. It really just depends on the neighborhoods.
Want to invite anyone to just go ahead and unmute and ask a question.
I guess I can stop sharing too. That would probably make it a little more conversational. Oh, there we go. Stop share. There we go. Maybe now I can put these links in the chat.
Yeah.
But go ahead if anyone has
Exactly.
questions.
That's what I was going to
Yeah.
ask, if you could put the links in the chat.
I'll do it right now.
I want to absolutely confirm with my experience here and other places that having a neighborhood define itself is going to be part of its success. Part of the issue that we have here in Felton Grove with the roads is there's only one road in and one road out. And even though we're in downtown Felton, you know, a 5-minute walk from Safeway, if you need to get in here, there's only one way in, one way out. There you can walk out, but you cannot drive out except through one source. And so I really think having people define what their neighborhood is helpful, because like our neighborhood is 50 houses. It just happens to work out wonderfully for statistics. And we also have a Facebook page, a Facebook group for our neighborhood. I think that can be, if you have the technical skills in your group to develop that also can be helpful.
Yeah, in our neighborhood too, we had a homeowners association and we have a road company or a road committee. So that same thing, any kind of bonding together like that, FireWise, Map My Neighborhood, it's all good.
Yes. Yeah. And the thing is, it speaks to your neighborhood's willingness to work collectively. That I think that is also important and helpful, is when you have people that are already committed to a collective mentality for little local stuff like what we're doing.
And you do have to proceed with caution. I have a really funny story about one of the neighborhood groups up here where after the first meeting and everyone was kind of, it all went well, the next time one person didn't participate. And so the neighborhood organizer went to him and said, you know, why didn't you participate? I thought it went really well last time. And the person said, well, I thought, you know, and they were asking questions like, do you have a generator? Do you have a chainsaw? You know, things that would be helpful in an emergency. And the person said, well, I thought you were getting a little too personal. And I thought the next question was going to be, how many firearms do you have? And I didn't want to give out that kind of information. So you just have to know who you're dealing with and sort of adjust appropriately.
Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering whether there were, you know, certain, I mean, it sounds like your program, you know, as you said, it's overlapping a lot of other initiatives that are already perhaps happening in your neighborhood, but, you know, you've had several months of different activities and growth and participation. So that seems like it's extremely successful. Are there other certain lessons learned that you think are takeaways from?
I think one thing that I've been doing that I think is really useful is you have to realize that everyone's not going to start at the same time. And some people aren't going to figure out what's going on until 6 months later. So we have this thing at the church. It's called, well, it's outside higher grounds now, where every Saturday morning between 9 and 11, they serve free coffee. And so every other Saturday, I post on our Facebook group and I go up there and I say, come ask me your radio questions. I'll program your MURS radio. So bring your MURS radio down and I'll plug it in, or just come ask me your questions. And sometimes people come and talk about ham radio. And sometimes they bring me a box of 5 MURS radios to program. And sometimes they say, what neighborhood am I in? So I think the consistency and the availability has been really important. And different people have different roles. Like Dawn, you can call her, you can bring your radios to her house. Me, I'll just show up at the church every other Saturday and program radios. So again, just trying to find the different things that speak to different people. Some people are enthralled with the maps. So they're like, oh, I want to be, and now I know with the maps. Me, I look at the maps and I can barely even figure them out. So it's just really all about different things for different people and figuring out what works. All right, any other questions? I want to hear about FireWise too.
Well,
because
Lisa, I wanted to ask you, how many people have decided they wanted to pursue a license and into ham radio?
we have had several people step up and get their ham radio license. At least 3 that I know of that already got their ham radio license, and more on the list for the next class. The other thing is we have one neighborhood that uses FRS radios. We have another neighborhood that uses GMRS radios. So the ones that we can easily support with the MURS, we do that, but we also try to work with things that are already existing, or if people choose different things for their own reasons.
Since this has been in place, has there been an incident where you feel like you've been able to put this, skills and techniques into practice?
There was one really good one in the first rainstorm that we had this year. I think it was the first rainstorm that we had this year. So, that's one of the questions on the frequently asked questions. When do I turn on my radio? Do I have to listen all the time? And so the general status is, if the power goes out or the internet goes out and your phone's not working, turn on your radio and listen. If you want to talk to someone, try to talk to someone. So sure enough, the power didn't go out, but the internet went out. And so I turned on my radio and I called out and I talked to 2 of my neighbors. One of them had actually driven down to Davenport and found out when Comcast was supposed to be back on that night. And so we were able to propagate that information. Comcast says they're going to be back on by 6:30 tonight. So it worked. I mean, not everyone got on, but at least people that wanted information or had information to give got on and were able to talk to each other.
Do you also have like email-based communication or group-based social media communication that's also backing all of these activities?
Not really. I mean, well, we have a Bonny Doon Facebook group called Slice of Heaven. And so we do use that for Bonny Doon wide, but if the internet's down, then the email's not gonna work, the cell phones aren't gonna work, the home phones aren't gonna work, the Facebook is not gonna work. So at least if we can talk on these radios, there might be 1 or 2 people that can, go up to the top of the mountain or go out on the bridge and get a little bit of coverage on their cell phone and, call 911 or relay a message to someone if that's what they need.
Cool. Thank you so much for sharing, Lisa. It was really great.
Well, feel free to go to the Bonny Doon Radio info website. There's a lot of good information there. And then the FireWise talk is good too with Dawn's version of this.
Yeah. And please pass along our gratitude and thanks to Dawn as well.
Oh, definitely. We love Dawn. She is so helpful. And I will say I'm on the starting line of the FireWise thing, and I'm a little overwhelmed with collecting the data. So any hints you have in that area will be great. I'm looking forward to.
Well, let's shift and talk a little bit about FireWise. So, and in particular, Bill, I know that you've been looking at that program and within your neighborhood, Bigfoot Hill, Sultan. Tell us about what's been your experience so far. I know you've shared with me personally some of this, but not everyone has heard your story.
Okay, well, I wish I could give the kind of success story that Lisa just did. My efforts have been to try to bring people together around the FireWise structure, if you will, and it's been very challenging. There are 84 homes in what I'm calling the Bigfoot Jackson neighborhood. And I think I've gotten about 16 of those homes expressing some kind of interest and willingness to talk about these things. However, I'm new to the neighborhood. I'm not very used to doing community organizing things. So what I appreciate about the FireWise program is that there's a nice structure of questions to ask, of people to try to organize and principles to organize around. Having said that, I'm beginning to appreciate that maybe FireWise isn't the best way to organize my neighborhood. So I'm really appreciating the idea of a road association. I like the idea of a church. We don't have a church in our neighborhood, but maybe it's time to start a coffee clutch. Maybe it's time to get the ice cream truck and park outside and just find some way to have sort of neighborhood gatherings and try to get a little momentum from that. My biggest issue with FireWise right now seems to be the amount of information they want. They have a lot of different requirements for being able to like, for example, organize a yearly meeting of information, get a coordinating committee. And that's turned out to be a really difficult thing for me in my neighborhood, because I don't have a core group of friends that I can rely on. And so I have to be making friends at the same time as I'm trying to organize them. And it's been quite a challenge for me. Having said that, I've gotten to know some really awesome people. And even though we haven't gotten into the form of a committee yet to, for example, be approving a risk assessment of the neighborhood, and then a plan for the next 3 to 5 years for what the community can do, I think we've taken some baby steps. And with Felton Fire Captain Audrey Dawson, she is amazing. She is amazing with being able to help us with the baby steps. So I am very appreciative of this meeting tonight to be able to help me move forward with the idea of organizing, but not necessarily doing so from a FireWise, and not necessarily organizing, just getting to know my neighbors. So Liz, did you have something that you wanted to say?
You answered my question. My question was going to be, have you had an assessment by the fire department? And you just told me that you did. Now, did Audrey come and meet with a number of people, or was it just you, or how did you organize that?
Well, sort of in a fit of desperation, it was just me. And then what I did was, we have a firefighter who lives in our neighborhood, and I met with him and went through item by item the things that Audrey had. So the challenge was getting everybody in the same room at the same time. And if I can just start doing the one-on-one meetings about the risk assessment, recruiting those folks to say, okay, will you let your name be put on as a committee member? That's been sort of the way I've been sneaking up on having an organized committee.
Okay.
So I'm real interested in other FireWise efforts throughout the San Lorenzo Valley, and how people are overcoming, especially in situations like mine, where you don't have an existing organization right now, that you're starting more from scratch. And I'd be very interested in if anyone had that kind of experience. So any other questions like that and information, I'm all ears.
The one thing that I can offer up, but first I have to just say, I think it's raining.
Oh,
Is it raining there? I think it's
I'll
raining.
check.
My brain system is not saying it, but I heard it. Anyway, I'm kind of in the same spot you are. Even though I have such this small neighborhood, I got the committee, but I don't have all the information that they're asking for. And one thing that I did get from actually from the Pine Ridge neighborhood is they made a form that they just emailed to everyone. So if you even have a list of emails, you could, and I'm going to hopefully soon start collecting data by just emailing this form out and saying, fill it out and send it back to me, or print it out and mail it to me, or bring it over to my house.
Let me give you some really great advice from from Audrey. Basically, she says there is no FireWise police. And so a lot of the numbers that she was, we were putting down were numbers that I thought were based more on her Felton-wide experience than on the specific neighborhood kind of information. And as I see it, FireWise is just collecting this data to create a baseline so that they can hopefully see improvements through the period of time that there is. So basically, Audrey's message was, don't worry about the numbers, just, get them anywhere in the ballpark. And the critical things are getting the people together to do the plan and doing, parts of the plan on a regular basis. And I think that that's really where FireWise can hit a home run.
That's interesting, because I feel like we're already doing that in our homeowners association, because we have so much common land and the common roads, and so much of it is, shaded fuel break for the egress and emergency egress. And so I think we're already doing it. I just need to get that paperwork done.
Yeah, I've talked with the folks in what's Forest Lakes? Is that the community south of me? My memory is going these days.
No.
Anyway, Forest Lakes has a very active mutual water association, and all of the organization around that, and they've gotten FireWise built into that now, and they are getting things done that count for FireWise, but in another context. And so it's just a matter of filling out the paperwork. Now, what's the incentive to fill out the paperwork? Well, in theory, if you get to be recognized, not certified, and FireWise makes a big deal about this, if you get to be recognized by FireWise, in theory, there's at least a couple of insurance companies that say they might offer you discount. My insurance company, State Farm, does not. And so I think that that's a less powerful incentive now than I thought going into the FireWise program. For me now, the coolest thing about doing this FireWise stuff is getting to know my neighbors.
It might pay out, the insurance angle might pay off down the line in just being able to have insurance. Because a lot of us are being canceled out by our insurance agencies, saying, oh, there's just too much risk. But there has been some mitigation from the state of California, which may end at any point. And I think there's a little bit of the Cal Fire and the Felton Fire starting to advocate for us, saying, well, our neighborhood is taking care of things like home hardening and things like that.
The other thing that we're hoping for, and it sounds kind of silly, is that sign that goes on the road to come in, that maybe someday the firefighters will see that and say, okay, we should go in there. I mean, we didn't have the problem where they wouldn't go down our road, but other roads up here did. And so anything that could hint to them that this is a safe place, this is defensible, you can turn your truck around, I think would be a real benefit.
Lisa, I think that that's really important. One of the things that Audrey showed me was the triage sheets that the firefighters use for houses that can be defended. And so making your house, or excuse me, your neighborhood, but specifically your house, more attractive for defending is really high on the priority of both FireWise and me. So that sign that FireWise recognized, not certified, is I think a really good point. I hadn't thought of it in those terms before.
Mhm. I think it also helps that in the process of getting that recognition, you're also reaching out to your local fire department and getting to know them, and they're getting to know you. And that makes a really big difference.
Yeah, the big challenge in a big wildfire situation is that you're going to have fire companies from out of town coming in and defending communities. And so that's why I really like Lisa's point about having the FireWise recognized sign outside the neighborhood. But yeah, you know, creating relationship with the fire department is absolutely a useful thing to have. And God bless Felton Fire and Audrey Dawson, because they've been really great at doing community involvement.
Does the FireWise setup have alternative ways you can achieve some of the physical labor that needs to occur to become safe? You know, sometimes I know people shy away because it's too much physical labor. They just can't do that, and they would be willing to hire out, but then, you know, other people may be willing, but obviously you want to be able to have some equity in that where everybody reaps the benefits. So is there any structure in the FireWise program that kind of talks to that, or is there professional help that would be willing to take a group purchase of an activity that needs to happen? Like
Yeah, Joe Marie, I want to say that FireWise is very generous in terms of how they count for activities that count toward that that level of 1 hour per year per household. And that's around $25 an hour is how they value that. So we had at least 2 neighbors hire a company that could, you know, do some tree work that, you know, helped, if not exactly a shaded fuel break, at least it took things away from the road, took a tree off of the neighbor's house, and all of that can be counted. And when you start doing the math, someone spending several thousands of dollars taking a tree down, that's we're golden. We're in. So they're very generous with the math. It's not a high bar to meet. And you know, the idea of 1 hour per year per household, that's actually become the least of my concerns.
Right.
It's getting the people organized as willing to be on the committee and coming up with a list of actions like getting more visible address signs and marking the fire hydrants, things like that are the kind of baby steps and not so baby that I think FireWise really wants to see happen.
And do you know if any professional groups offer discount services?
Yes, I've heard that FireWise recognition makes you more able to get grants from, I think it's the Resource Conservation District and the Fire Safe Council, to be able to, for example, hire chippers. And so what they can do is have a community cleanup day where everybody puts their branches, you know, near the road, and the chipper service will come from house to house and chip anything they find in that kind of thing, and that can be paid for. But typically they require the community to be to achieve FireWise recognition before they'll grant you that.
Oh, okay. Because I can see that if somebody is really, you know, paycheck to paycheck type of thing, the thought of spending extra money on something, and they may not be physically able to do some of the basic work, can be kind of two barriers. You know.
Really good point. And I've been trying to get past that. Haven't been very effective yet, but I've noticed a number of people saying, no, I don't want to commit myself to this stuff. And I want people to understand, and I need to get better at communicating this, that the level of commitment is, you know, it's a very low bar. And really it's a commitment to knowing your neighbors. And I have this idea called evacuation buddies, and I'm trying to get everyone in the neighborhood to have someone that they can call during an evacuation and make sure that we're all okay. So just that, I think, is the level of commitment that I'm looking for, and that I think would help people see how tough it is.
Bill, I have worked with you for a long time now, and a process that I always enjoy. But one of the things I notice about you is sometimes you confuse the vision with where you are. And I want you to focus a little bit more on where you are. You have done a tremendous amount of organizing work already. You have the seeds planted. Just keep trudging along. At some point, you'll have 2 people by your side, and then you'll have 3 and more, and it will grow. It takes, especially if you're moving into a neighborhood where people don't see community yet, then you're building more than just a list of people who will attend a meeting. So you have a lot of inertia to overcome, and just it sounds like you're a little losing faith, and I want to remind you that what you're doing is hard work, and it's okay that you are where you are.
Yeah,
Liz,
just an
2
example of that, because I think I can hold my neighborhood up as an example. When we first moved here 15 years ago in El Solio Heights neighborhood above the high school, there was a neighbor trying to organize us just to get the water system under control, because it was just in horrible, awful shape. No neighbors were speaking to each other. Nobody knew where the leaks were, stuff like that. And he was very frustrated because he had been working on trying to get us together for 2 years by the time I moved in. And he was ready to give up. Well, what he needed was just a little time and a catalyst. Slowly, the neighbors aggregated over different problems we had. And over the last 15 years, our neighborhood has gone from one in which nobody spoke to each other to where everybody says hello, all up and down the street. And they're all going, how's your water doing? You know, and what's going on with your part of the road? And oh, do you need help cutting those trees along the road there so that the fire engine can get through? A lot of cooperation, but it took us 15 years to get here.
Well, I want to thank you, Allison, for that kind of story, and Liz, thank you for your encouragement. But I'd also like to pivot to what SLVEN's role might be in this, and specifically, SLVEN as an emergency network, an organization of organizations. I think that this kind of encouragement, this kind of cultivation of people who get frustrated, who haven't had the experience organizing, but have this group to be able to be encouraged by, to give, you know, the good stories. I think that that's a really important function, certainly of this meeting, but maybe for SLVEN in general. So Tammy, thank you so much for organizing this topic. And I am definitely encouraged, I'm going to try to be in less of a hurry and just to find the little things that we can do together. So thank you very much.
Sure.
And Bill,
thank you for sharing.
when times are dark, you have my phone number.
Thank you, Liz.
Well, Bill and I had we had our own little bit of synchronicity that brought us together to talk on this subject too. And there was some, you know, unrelated subject, and we both show up at a meeting for this other cause and saw each other there. And like we point at each other like, you're here? What? Wait. And so we found like, oh, yet another reason to be connected to each other, which is cool. And then, you know, Bill and I started talking about what steps he was taking in his neighborhood with FireWise. Similarly, in my neighborhood over the summer, we've got a couple people in my neighborhood who are kind of like key organizers. You know, they've got their own, two different email lists with slightly different subsets of folks from the neighborhood or friends that you know, call together. Hey, let's have a meeting and, you know, celebrate this or that. And so one of them got in touch with Captain Audrey Dawson of Felton Fire to basically give a little neighborhood talk on FireWise, which was cool, and also do a little walk around in that particular part of the neighborhood. And I was pretty optimistic that we might be able to get off on a start with FireWise, but then and I thought for sure that we would have a small core, but it didn't really take off. I think that there was some recognition of it felt like maybe some of the requirements were a little bit off-putting to start with. So I think that what you've said, Bill, is I think also a takeaway, which is to probably reapproach, you know, to keep people in my neighborhood and say, hey, I know we saw this and it seemed great, but then maybe seemed like it was too much. Let's look at it again and see if we can find some on-roads to meet and talk about it. And then the second is that my other neighborhood is another social network. And it turned out that we had this one gal who it was her personal email list because, you know, she made good friends in the neighborhood. She's sort of a networking social person. But then anytime anybody wanted to be added to the list, it was her email list. She had to manage it, and it became unwieldy. And then when the fires happened, we all had evacuated. We suddenly realized that we really were benefiting from, if you were on the list, you were in. And some people had cameras in their yards and they could share stills. You know, when we were all evacuated, somebody would post a picture and say, see, our homes are still standing. And we were like, oh, it's great, you know. So we found that we were sharing information in this way. But it became so difficult for my friend to manage this email list, and then she would get busy and then she'd get behind in an email and she would feel horrible that she wasn't passing forward information. Well, you know, obviously the solution to that was to you know, start a proper email list, and my husband, it turns out, you know, thinks nothing of getting another domain name and spinning up another email list. So he did that and sort of automated the list so that our friend didn't have to be the one doing it. And so that's turned out to be a cool catalyst for our, you know, communication in our neighborhood. Yeah, Liz.
I haven't seen what I've heard categorized here as the requirements for FireWise. I'm wondering if Map Your Neighborhood might be a softer approach. I don't know. I don't know enough to compare them.
Right.
But that
And
might,
Mhm.
that was one thing. And the other thing is, in our particular area, people are very sensitive about how much information and what information you're collecting. And as a consequence, since we know that in our area, then we may want to look at those programs and say, you know, this is information we would like, but you do not have to provide this information to be part of our group. And so I think we may need to soften some of those requirements. Anyway,
one of the things
oh,
I've
sorry.
contemplated this in the past, just, you know, basically trying to initiate something in the neighborhood. One of the things I was interested about, particularly looking at SLVEN, was available bodies, like to canvass a neighborhood, to walk door to door. It takes a lot of effort for an individual to go door to door, knocking on doors, you know, even if it's to leave a hanger or a flyer that says, "Hey neighbor, let's get together and you know, and have a meeting." You know, I feel like I'm now in a different place where I would want to do that personally, face to face. I want to make those connections, right? I think, and I also think my neighborhood is different now than it was 10 years ago. So in a lot of ways more approachable. But one of the things I was thinking about with SLVEN was, okay, if we could try to support a neighborhood's effort to even just get information out, maybe that they have a neighborhood that's not connected by emails and they know each other, then how can you help a neighborhood, you know, kind of get off the ground? Can we volunteer to go walk a neighborhood and leave door hangers? Could we actually help organize a meeting on behalf of a neighborhood and be sort of the neutral third party program leaders in the neighborhood to talk about even a variety of, just even assess what people's needs and desires might be, and to help get them going with organization in a lot of ways that the kind of the Map Your Neighborhood does it, like the speaker that presents the program and then, you know, tries to hand it off to the neighborhood to take it from there.
One of the things I'd like to do is perhaps put together a list of models of neighborhood organization. So we've talked about FireWise, Map Your Neighborhood, road associations, Tupperware parties, and maybe look at the variety and categorize them by rewards. For example, what we were talking about, having a sign outside the neighborhood might make it more friendly to first responders, and talk about how difficult it is to achieve those things. But I think what I'm really interested in from this meeting is you don't just need one way, or you can't just use one way to organize a neighborhood, that there's lots of different ways to do it. And each of them has their rewards and benefits.
Diana Sue, Glenn, Joe Marie, any other questions, comments?
Nope, I'm good.
Well, it seems like part of the benefit of what Lisa is explaining about FireWise is that there's connection with the fire department in terms of communicating by having signs in your neighborhood about what you've done. It seems like there's some external benefits eventually from the FireWise organization that I'm not quite understanding, but it sounds like a remarkable thing that's happened up in Bonny Doon, and I really want to say kudos to you guys.
I really like the MURS radio concept for many of the reasons why that you mentioned, Lisa. I mean, I've got a couple, right? I've done a lot of trainings. I like the sweet spot that it hits between the ability, the technical ability versus relative ease of use. I think that could be something that could also be attractive in my neighborhood. It's funny, my house is kind of halfway up this big hill, and I've always thought about this concept of, oh, if we're gonna activate in some disaster, and then we're all gonna meet and walk around the neighborhood, and there needs to be some sort of a command post. And I'm like scratching my head and thinking, okay, if I put a command post like in my yard, who's gonna want to run up the hill to my house? Like, after you've done that once, you're like, nah, I'm done. So we need to make it a little bit easier to talk to each other. So that's that's really a cool idea to put the MURS to use. And even whether or not we had enough hams, to do kind of higher level of message passing, like you guys do in Bonny Doon.
Well, my husband and I started out just using it between the two of us, or when, the nieces and nephews would come, they'd go on a hike and they would talk to me. And it started out as kind of fun and games, but then it got really useful.
Well, and it's a challenge. I think Bonny Doon has consistent issues with cell phone and power and things like that. Those of us in other areas are less of that. So we don't see the benefit or can experience the benefit it's not realized as much. So there's less impetus to make the change or do the effort, where up in Bonny Doon, everybody consistently, it's an ongoing issue all the time. They know day to day, they can't even, their cell phones don't reach,
Yeah, good point.
And especially with the fires and the landlines not being replaced, or you can't even get one up there. They're not putting the lines in and stuff, of the things that burnt down. So you're forced to do it because you do want to communicate. But us in different areas, we have less time, downtime like that.
Yeah.
So, trying to get that spark is the big thing, trying to figure that out. I did want to ask Bill, do you know if your neighbors are predominantly the homeowners, or do you have a rental sections as well amongst your neighbors?
I don't have good stats. I just try to ask folks, where you're from, and try to get it from that perspective. So if I were just to pull a number out of the air, I'd say we're at least 2/3 homeowners.
Yeah, my neighborhood, it's the opposite. I'm predominantly surrounded by renters, and it's a revolving door of new people moving in and out. And so trying to, I may meet somebody and we have a great relationship, but then when I start talking about property and cleaning up and things like that, they say, oh, well, I'll have to ask the homeowner. And then of course it goes off in the sunset and you never hear back again. So that feels like my local struggle. Have you heard or seen anything with FireWise that can address some of that?
No, I really don't think I have. It definitely seems to be oriented towards the people paying for the fire insurance.
Right.
Having said that, the thing that's come out of this meeting for me of, there's not just one way to organize a neighborhood. I'm wondering if map your neighborhood might be, more appropriate, or just, I'm looking for the alternative of Tupperware parties. Anybody got any ideas for how we can organize?
Bill,
Have a garage
Mostly
sale.
renters.
yeah, I am happy to come up and do Map Your Neighborhood with you and a group of people, or so just know that we can do that.
Cool.
And
Joe Marie,
maybe-
Joe Marie, does that sound like something that's going to help in your neighborhood? Do you think you could do a Map Your Neighborhood there?
I don't think so. Based on who the renters are, the people that I've interconnected with, and most of the homeowners are out of the area. They're not even local. They're, like
Yeah.
Bay Area and place, or South County, type of thing. So I don't know. But when I do meet new people and I see a potential for an improvement, like the neighbor right across the street, it was during the fires. We were out talking, and I said, well, do you have a plan? And, and I looked up, and their palm tree, they have this weird palm tree in front of the limb was touching the roof. And I said, and it was dead. And I said, you know what? There's the risk right there. And the guy went up, scaled up the ladder and took down those palm fronds right away, because I scared him, because the ash was flying around already. And I said, yeah. So I take the teachable moments, but it's not organized or collectively organized at all. But, people see me out with, the vest on, when I get out and get ready to go, so what do you belong to that you're wearing a safety vest type discussion? But beyond that, I'm not sure. I keep whittling and I keep saying, well, we have CERT and we have SLVEN, and, so I keep promoting, but, haven't won that battle yet.
It's really interesting to think about that. And I admit I hadn't spent any time prior, thinking, so what happens in a neighborhood that's like that? And one thing that comes to mind is that maybe the neighborhood where there's a lot of renters, as individuals, they probably still have needs, and they still maybe need some support, right? They might not have too much of a connectedness in the neighborhood per se.
Right.
They might not actually socialize too much in the neighborhood. So any kind of social events would be good opportunities to help those people network, or just the sort of thing like comes to mind is like the go bag kit lists or whatever from tabling. If you can serve needs, pushing information to those folks, that might help them just generally become more resilient. Maybe they would be open to receive information, since they're not in a position of property ownership to kind of collectively participate kind of in that way. But there still may be ways to create bridges that could turn into the kind of ad hoc dynamic support at times of need, because they would know each other.
One thing I do know my neighborhood can handle is medicals. We got 3 nurses in the neighborhood.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
Of various types. We got a pediatric nurse, we got critical care, and we got behavioral health, covered. So we have several.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So, and so I said, well, we could all kind of help out if necessary, and I keep trying to bring in that type of, so I already know a few skill sets that are unique in the area, you know.
Well,
And I will say, I think the FireWise financial commitment is really only 1 hour or $25.
Mhm.
So it's not a big commitment. If you could convince them it was for their own safety and they
Right.
were young, I'm thinking maybe.
Well,
they
and that's
might
the
be able
thing
to
is
do
that
it.
these are youngsters. They're renters. You know,
Yeah.
not saying older people don't rent, but the majority of are on the younger side.
Even if they just did a community work day to
They
help
don't,
someone.
either their landlord has scared the bejeebies out of them about touching the property, you know, because there's that kind of, you know, we got the tree hugger groups and, you know, things like that. So trying to find how to get in, you know, and or suggesting that they can share with their landlord, you know, about trying to improve things, or, you know.
Well, that's
Well-
interesting. So, you know, because what if we had, you know, a letter from SLVEN that was meant to be given, you know, to the landlord. Hi, landlord. You want to know that, you know, we exist in the community and we're interested in helping this community survive. And that includes the folks that, you know, may be renting at your property. But we
Right.
want to, you know, we want to meet you too, and connect you into the, you know, what's going on in the neighborhood. That might be an interesting role that
Right.
we could take too as an organization.
Right. Because you're not going to see them at a tabling and things like that, especially if they're out of area. But if the renter could share that, hey, I got this from my neighborhood, you know, other neighbors that are interested in beautification and safety, you know.
I wonder if there's any material out there about how do you deal with your landlord in terms of safety of your living situation.
I'm sure there is.
I'm sure there is. Yeah. Yeah.
Probably have to be careful. You don't want to scare them off their landlord. But it doesn't have to be their house. If you have a house where someone can't afford to have the work done, you could have a community work party and have everybody work on that person's house.
Right. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Or
you need to,
like my one neighbor is a rat trap of, you know, the cats love to visit it. I would love to be able to approach him to be able to say, hey, let's all get together and we can improve our properties. And his would be the first one because it's the scariest one.
but that is
I
a conundrum
want
too.
to jump in here because
Yeah.
it's really important from Audrey that not everybody will be able to, you know, be recruited for FireWise. And
Right.
so
Mhm.
she has continuously encouraged me not to try to get the rat traps, you know, and to put those lower on the list. Just do where you can do.
Exactly.
Usually the rat trap type people are not interested in cooperating either. They often perceive that as you being nosy.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And sometimes, well, each situation is individual, but yes, it's even if you go in and eliminate most of it, it may still grow back.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's but you do what you can do. So
Okay, well, I'm pretty sure it's raining now.
Oh.
okay, it's not here. It's not, or it wasn't when I stepped out the door. But you know, there's a lot of miles between you and me. I'm in downtown Felton, so
I mean, I don't know, it's not that many miles, but it's a mountain or two.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a
It's
mountain
cold
barrier.
out there already, though.
Yeah.
It's 45 degrees here at my house right now.
Yes,
Ooh.
so that tells me we don't have much cloud cover
Right.
on this
Mhm.
side. So
Well, Well, every little drop counts no matter where it is in the county.
As long as it doesn't all come past my back door.
I said drop, not.
Yeah, I know. I heard you. I heard you. No, I'm supportive of the idea of having some more rain. So
Good night.
Thanks,
Good night.
everyone.
Thank
Happy
you,
Thanksgiving.
thank you.
Happy holiday.